Our 17 Bible periods, and that'll be about it. We'll turn it over to Lance to cover chapter 16 here. If you will, say them with me. Before the flood, scattering of the people, patriarchs, Exodus, wandering in the wilderness, invasion and conquest, judges, united kingdom, divided kingdom, Judah alone, captivity, return from captivity, years of silence, life of Christ, early church, and letters to the Christians. All right, what Bible period are we in right now? All right, the Exodus, but hadn't the Exodus already happened? Yeah, so as the Bible periods go, don't get caught up necessarily in the name of the period. It relates to the event surrounding, usually named after an event, but just keep that in mind. We're in the Exodus, that they have exited Egypt. They're in the wilderness. They're not quite to wandering in the wilderness because God hasn't pronounced that sentence on them yet. So just be aware that these names are general kind of earmarks for time in the Bible story. And as we go through, that there's some overlapping maybe a little bit, but that generally gives you an idea, start to finish, of the Bible history. So keep that in mind as we study. That's not unique to these lessons here. There are other situations where there's some overlap, United Kingdom, divided kingdom, stuff like that. So we are in Exodus 16. As a reminder, we've just, last class we covered the crossing of the Red Sea, and now they're on the other side and they have defeated the Egyptians. Let's.
Houston, care to lead a prayer? Thank you, Houston. So, I just put a map up. I'm going to apologize. This is one of the possible maps, as we've already covered. There is a potential crossing site here. There is a potential crossing site down here, further down the Gulf of Aqaba. There's a potential crossing site somewhere around here, and I've seen some crazy maps where they cross somewhere down here. Point is, they crossed. When we get into Exodus 16, verse 1, then they set out from Elim, and all the congregation of the sons of Israel came to the wilderness of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the second month after departure from the land of Egypt. Now, this is again one of those things. It's the 15th day of the second month after they left, but that's not entirely clear what that means. It could be as short as 30 days. Andrew and I were having this good text back and forth. He's got some good points. I've got the way I interpret it. It could be as early as he's saying the second month after they left, counting it from the very first day God said this is the first day of the year. So that would be then 15 days till the Passover when they actually left. So then 30 days later would be the second month. Or it could be saying start the timer right after they left, and now this is 2 months, 15 days later. Or it could be this is in the second month, 15 days into that month after they left. Or you could start the timer the month after they left, and now it's 2.5 months later. Somewhere in the range from 30 days to 90 days, give or take, we're now at the wilderness of Sin. And considering how on our map we're somewhere in this area, which could also be around here, which also could be around there, I'd say we're doing pretty good with our estimate for time. But we know it's the timeline God meant when he said it. So the whole congregation then grumbles against Moses and Aaron, and they say to them, "Would that we had died by the Lord's hand in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the pots of meat, when we ate bread to the full, for you have brought us out of this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger." So they start complaining again. Now verse 2 says they're grumbling against Moses and Aaron. Well, who else do we discover they're grumbling against? God. And where do you get that from? Their permission to do it. And then Moses and Aaron actually in verse 8, Moses specifically says, "And what are we? Your grumbling is not against us, but against the Lord." So we can add in, they grumble against Moses and Aaron and the Lord in 16 verse 8.
I like how Moses prefaces that too with, who are we, right? It goes back to the meekness and humility of Moses. Who are we? Who are we? Why are you complaining to us?
Yep. So they complain. Moses basically says, "Who are we?" And God actually hears this complaint. So he said to Moses, "Behold, I will rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a day's portion every day, that I may test them, whether or not they will walk in my instruction." 16 verse 9, then Moses said to Aaron, "Say to all the congregations of the son of Israel, come near before the Lord, for he has heard your grumblings." It came about as Aaron spoke to the whole congregation of the sons of Israel. They looked toward the wilderness, and behold, the glory of the Lord appeared in the cloud. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "I've heard the grumblings of the sons of Israel. Speak to them, saying, At twilight you shall eat meat, and in the morning you shall be filled with bread, and you shall know that I am the Lord your God." So what does God promise to give them to eat? Meat and bread. Now, did you notice anything different about the time God spoke about those two items of food? In your study before class, or you notice anything different about talking about the meat he was going to give versus the bread? So the meat's going to be coming in the evening at twilight. The bread's going to be showing up in the morning. So also interesting is God actually only says he's going to be giving this meat in this one circumstance, which becomes highly relevant when you go to Numbers chapter 11, because there in Numbers chapter 11, the people are saying they're tired of this lousy bread. So they're given meat the first time right before they get the manna, but this is a one-time event. On the other hand, every day, except for the Sabbath day, God is going to be giving them this bread from heaven. So he's going to be giving that to them for 40 years going forward. So there's a difference here. So then it came about, the quail came up and covered the camp, and in the morning there was a layer of dew around the camp, which I'm just picturing this, got a layer of dew. So you're about, how much water do you get with a layer of dew? Andrew, how much dew have you ever seen in depth? I'm from a dry place.
Yeah, no, I mean, when it frosts, it kind of covers everything, but it's a very, very thin amount on every little blade.
So a tiny little amount of water. So when the dew evaporated, on the surface there was a fine flake-like thing, fine as the frost on the ground. When the sons of Israel saw it, they said to one another, "What is it?" For they did not know what it was. And Moses said to them, "It is the bread which the Lord has given you to eat." So I took this picture from Shutterstock, hence the giant words right here. Completely legal, as long as I reference them. This is what a Syrian frost looks like. I took this is actually based out of part of Syria. So you got this fine white powder kind of covering the surface of the ground. So that's what the Jews are starting to come out, and every morning they're going to be seeing everywhere to go pick up. Also, when they said to one another, "What is it?" the word "what" is pronounced man or mun or man or ma. And then the word "is it" is nu or na. So if you put those two together, you got man na. So we call it manna. When they so manu, the word itself is usually just man by itself. So it's not the what is it? It's really just what. So they see this stuff and they're like, "What?" And they get to eat it. So coriander. Anyone here a cook who works with coriander seed? Know what it looks like? Me neither, so I had to go to Shutterstock again and pull up pictures of coriander seed. So you're talking about something like this, tiny little granules, except they're pure white. So that's manna that God is starting to give them. So this is what the Lord has commanded. Gather of it every man as much as he should eat. He should take an omer apiece, according to the number of persons that each of you has in his tent. The sons of Israel did so, and some gathered much, and some gathered little. When they measured with an omer, he would gather much, had no excess, and when he gathered little, had no lack. Every man gathered just as much as he should eat. So as Moses said to them, "Let no man leave any of it until morning," and it bred worms and became foul, and Moses was angry with them. They gathered it morning by morning, each man as much as he should eat, but when the sun grew hot, it would melt. So again, it's almost like that frost that it's described to look like. Sun rises and your bread just melts, which is really cool that that's how they're being fed, but also kind of sad. Like, oh, that food just gone. Picture your freezer thawing in the middle of the summer. That's kind of how I'd start feeling. Now on the sixth day, they gathered twice as much bread, 2 omers for each one, when all the leaders of the congregation came and told Moses. Then he said to them, this is what the Lord meant. Tomorrow is a Sabbath day, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. Bake what you shall bake, and boil what you will boil, and what is left over be put aside and kept until morning. Verse 24, so they put it aside until morning as Moses ordered, and it did not become foul, nor is there any worm in it. Moses said, eat it today, for today is a Sabbath to the Lord. Today you will not find it in the field. 6 days you shall gather it, but on the seventh day, the Sabbath, there will be none.
So do you think in verse 23, when it says bake what you will bake, boil what you will boil, are they baking this manna, do y'all think? I think it takes some preparation even after they gather it. And before, when it talked about he who gathers much or he who gathers little, if they measured it with an omer, they were good. That's interesting to me. It sounds like to me that as long as you were measuring it, you were okay. If you were packing it in there, as long as you could get it in an omer, if you just kind of lightly put it in there, it was enough for the people and the families.
Yep, and in Numbers 11:8, the people would go about and gather it and grind it between two millstones or beat it in the mortar. So they grind it between two millstones or beat it. They'd boil it in a pot and make cakes with it, and its taste was the taste of cakes baked with oil. So tastes like cake. I mean, that's a pretty good meal. It's a tasty food to be eating all the time. And its taste was like wafers with honey is what Exodus 16:31 describes it as. So it's delicious. They're preparing it multiple different ways. It's sustaining, and they always had enough. So it came about on the seventh day, though, that some of the people went out. They looked. They found none. So the Lord said to Moses, how long do you refuse to keep my commandments and my instructions? See, the Lord has given you the Sabbath. Therefore, he gives you bread for 2 days on the sixth day. Remain every man in his place. Let no man go out of his place on the seventh day. So the people rested on that seventh day. So here we see the observance of the Sabbath. But why did God provide manna to be gathered 1 day at a time? Dependence on him. All right, what else? Want to test to see if we follow instructions. That's the explicit reason God said here in verse 4. And the people shall go out and gather a day's portion every day, that I may test them, whether or not they will walk in my instruction. So he's testing, making them rely on him. And that's 16 verse 4. So how well did they do in this chapter alone in this test? Seeing a lot of shakes and not well, so how did they fail in this test? I'm sorry? So the second time they went out on the Sabbath day and they tried to grab food and like, where'd it go? Which should have trusted and listened. Luke? And you make sure it went bad the next day. So they never had too much. How else did they not do well in this test of walking in his instructions? Brother, I'll look like you had a comment too. Mm-hmm. Yep. That's Tristan. Yeah, read it. So I bet you they were the hoarders of the Israelite population. Take enough for a day and they went, aha, I got enough for 2 days now. And then it became rod. So that's one of the ways. And then the other way is they went looking on the Sabbath day when God told them not to. So when God said, here's my test, They managed to fail the test both ways that you possibly could. So that's not going to bode well for the Israelites going forward. When you fail literal, it's like you've got a multiple choice test with 3 answers, and they managed to choose both A and D, or A and C when the answer was B. There's everywhere around it. Yeah.
And it was an omer per person in the house.
Yep. It's 1/10 of an ephah. So whatever an ephah is, it's 1/10 of that. Yep. Yeah, that's our transliteration from one guy who thought that maybe a quart translated to an omer. We're not really sure, but yeah, it could be 2 quarts. Though even quarts got different meaning depending on what time of history you're talking about. Gotta love chemistry. The Germans, they came in and made it all consistent. So, Exodus 16, the sons of Israel did so, and some gathered much and some little. Luke's already commenting on this a bit. When they gathered with an omer, he who had gathered much had no excess, and he who had gathered little had no lack. Every man gathered as much as he should eat. This is actually referenced in the New Testament in a very weird place. First of all, it'd be weird to quote this to make a teaching of doctrine, but this actually comes up in 2 Corinthians chapter 8, where for this is not for the ease of others, in the context of Paul telling the Corinthians that they need to set aside money, as they said they would, to give to the Jewish brethren who are in need. And for your affliction, but by way of equality, at this present time, your abundance being a supply for their need, so that their abundance also may become a supply for your need, that there may be equality. As it is written, he who gathered much did not have too much, and he who gathered little had no lack. Seems like a weird place to be teaching about giving when we're pulling from a passage about manna being brought in from heaven. So what does the Israelites gathering manna teach us about our giving as Christians? Trust in God, He'll supply for you. Well, what's that look like?
Matthew 5 indicates that it's food, clothing, necessities of life.
Necessities. So, he who gathered much did not have too much. He who gathered little had no lack. How do you apply that to your giving? Because clearly we're supposed to learn something from this passage about the manna. Luke's way of interpreting it is that God is making sure miraculously that those who gathered too much suddenly didn't have as much as they did. Another way to say it is that they shared it voluntarily. That's one way to look at it. Or that they had extra and they're like, okay, you take it. There's a lot of ways to interpret that situation. It doesn't actually make it clear. But when I'm reading this, it seems like Paul's making the point that God does sometimes give an abundance to one group of people so that they're able to meet a need for another when a disaster arises, which speaks really well to this congregation, because I know this congregation is given to hurricane relief when people have lost their homes. But part of what God teaches about Christians with their giving is there's a reason why he gives those blessings. You who gathered much should not have an excess, and you who gathered little should have no lack. So we're supposed to learn something from manna in the wilderness about giving. Now, what that means exactly is a different discussion. In Exodus 16:15, this comes up again, yeah.
To me, the interesting thing about the 16, 17, and 18, I think it is, if you'll go back one slide, I read it as, it's he who measured with an omer. That's kind of the qualifier. Whether you gathered in excess or you gathered little, the thing that made it work was they gathered it with an omer. They measured it. They did what God told them to do. And I think for our giving now, if we're focused more on how God would have us do the thing with our resources, money, time, whatever that is, then he's going to make sure that it's right and it's, usable, and we can be resourceful for the things that he's given us, whether that we would consider that little or an excess.
And he's the one who provides anyways.
Yep.
Luke, did you? There's more in this chapter that's referenced in the New Testament. There's a lot. So when the sons of Israel saw it, they said to one another, Manu, for they did not know what it was. And Moses said to them, it is the bread which the Lord has given you to eat. Well, then Jesus actually references this in John chapter 8. Our fathers ate the manna in the wilderness, as it is written, he gave them bread out of heaven to eat. Jesus then said to them, truly, truly, I say to you, it is not Moses who's given you the bread out of heaven, but it's my Father who gives you the true bread out of heaven. And then in verse 51, I am the living bread that came down of heaven. If anyone eats of this bread, he will live forever. And the bread also which I will give for the life of the world is my flesh. So Jesus then references back to Exodus 16 to say, learn something about me here. So what does God providing Manu, as is recorded in Exodus 16, teach us about Jesus? So our deliverance. So Jesus has provided for us for our deliverance. He's coming down from heaven, so he's from God, not of ourselves, so that no man may boast. What else? What else can we learn about Jesus from the manna? To have faith. That faith is so important. For example, Jesus was teaching his disciples to pray, give us this day our daily bread. If Jesus is the bread that came down from heaven, and that prayer is supposed to be a reflection of Exodus 16, talking about the daily bread God provided for his people, are we praying for our daily bread in the sense of our daily need for Jesus, to spend time with him, to learn about him, spend time with the word, because he's the bread that came down out of heaven. He is our daily bread. So our faith in Jesus is so important. How else does faith tie in there about Jesus here for our bread from heaven? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Which is faith. Yeah. Yeah. It's not just I believe whatever God, I've got this intellectual idea. It's I hear what you said, God, I believe it, and now I act accordingly based on what you said. And that's faith. So yes, and there's requirements for this manna, the same way there's requirements to accept Jesus. Just saying, Jesus, I accept you, is not accepting Jesus. Any other ways that y'all can see? Because that's a question that can be left as a, I think the phrase I've heard once was a brain noodler. Because Exodus 16 is referencing Jesus, apparently. Yeah. Freely given. That's fantastic. Yeah, freely given. And so that tells us that the Jews, knowing their history, should have realized every time they read about the manna coming down from heaven, they should have seen Jesus and realized, here's what that was talking about. And so there's a lot of emphasis put here about this bread from heaven. And then one last thing really struck me in this chapter, and it's actually referenced to. In 1 Corinthians 10, 6 or 12, we're told about these things happen as an example for us so that we don't crave the same evil things that they do. And in Philippians 3, it warns us about certain people whose God become their appetite, their glory and their shame, who set their mind on earthly things. But it was really striking me as I was writing down these different questions. The Jews were complaining, you could say anywhere from 30 to 90 days after leaving Egypt, somewhere in that window, during which time the only food they had was the food that they brought with them, which at this point had to be running pretty low. And then they started complaining, and God was not pleased with them. God was not pleased with how they handled it once they got the food. So God then provides bread from heaven that was enough for only a single day, and God was actually displeased when they grumbled again about what he was providing. So what signs might indicate that we're like the Jews, that our God is our appetite? What are we supposed to learn from Exodus 16 about our relationship with food? eat enough. Yeah. Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. So that was one that I was getting slightly irritated at myself for, because I will complain after eating the same meal for like a week. Now you picture carrying only got the food you got on your back for 30 to 90 days. You barely have water to go with on your travel. You were provided water once, and then you're going to be given the same meal day after day after day. And God was not pleased, and they grumbled. So that was like hitting me right between the eyes as I was putting this together, going, man, I got in there. So, brain noodler. And I think that, and then at the end of chapter 16, God gives them a reminder he has the manna put into the ark.
All right, Exodus 17. They find themselves in Rephidim, but before we get there, because it ties both to chapter 16 and 17 that we're talking about, if you'll turn with me to Deuteronomy 8. I don't have it up on the screen, so you'll have to turn there. Deuteronomy 8, 2 through 10 tells us a little bit more about what God was trying to do here in getting them to trust him. So Deuteronomy 8, 2 through 10. You shall remember all the way which the Lord your God has led you in the wilderness these 40 years, that he might humble you, testing you to know what was in your heart, whether you keep his commandments or not. All right, that sounds a lot like what Lance read earlier. He humbled you and let you be hungry and fed you with manna which you did not know, nor did your fathers know, that he might make you understand that man does not live by bread alone, but man lives by everything that proceeds out of the mouth of the Lord. So God takes them into the wilderness. They travel for however long it was. He intentionally wanted them to be hungry. For what purpose? So that they would learn to trust him. So when we get to chapter 17, where there was no water, I don't think we should be thinking about Israel just being kind of thirsty, like I get kind of thirsty. I don't know, potentially I've never been as thirsty as the people here. Remember, they're out in the wilderness with very little relief. So they are hungry and thirsty, I think, in a very real sense of the word, instead of how I use it all the time. Man, I'm hungry. I could go for whatever. Or, man, I'm really thirsty. Well, yeah, I just had a glass of water like an hour ago, So it's relative, but I think in this case, Israel was really struggling with hunger and thirst. All right, verse 4, your clothing did not wear out on you, nor did your foot swell these 40 years. Thus, you are to know in your heart that the Lord your God was disciplining you just as man disciplines his son. All right, if Israel is supposed to get the lesson from them being so hungry and so thirsty that they're wanting to go back to Egypt, can you imagine that? They're hungry and thirsty enough that they said, we were slaves and we were better off. I can't even understand that. I think we have trouble relating to that. But I think that speaks to how hungry and thirsty they were, maybe. But God did it intentionally to find out if they would follow his instructions. And also what this tells us is God expected Israel to know that their God was disciplining them. That's a lesson for me, I know. When things are tough, when things don't feel like they're flowing as easy spiritually or something like that, keep trusting the Lord. Maybe he's disciplining you so that you can bear more fruit. That's something I would do well to remember. Luke? That's right. And so they were supposed to know that they were disciplined. Verse 7. For the Lord your God is bringing you into a good land, a land of brooks of water. You're thirsty? There's going to be water aplenty where I'm taking you. Of fountains and springs flowing north in valleys and hills, a land of wheat and barley, of vines and fig trees and pomegranates, a land of olive oil and honey, a land where you will eat food without scarcity, in which you will lack nothing, a land whose stones are iron and out of whose hills you can dig copper. When you have eaten and are satisfied, you shall bless the Lord your God for the good land which he has given you. This testing was intended for a temporary time to find out if the people would follow God's instruction. And it wasn't just some frivolous testing for the fun of it, right? It was to find out if their hearts were actually the Lord's. And the Lord says, where I'm taking you is unlike anything you've ever experienced. You will eat without problem. You'll have water everywhere. The place I'm taking you will be well worth whatever struggle this is. So we come to 17, and it says the people were thirsty and there was no water. All right, this isn't just a couple folks either, where if you found a little puddle of water somewhere, an oasis in the desert, that could kind of handle both of you. We're talking about hundreds of thousands, millions possibly, of people here that need water. I mean, you're going to need a river or something like that in order to quench the thirst of all these people. So they do what they did in the previous chapter. They complained against Moses. Verse 2 and 3, they said, give us water, and why have you brought us out here from Egypt to kill us with thirst? Hey, Moses, we're about to die. Look at all these people out here that you have led out of Egypt. We have no water. But what was the real issue? Look at verse 7. Exodus 17:7. Says he named the place Massah and Meribah because of the quarrel of the sons of Israel, and because they tested the Lord, saying, is the Lord among us or not? Put that phrase in verse 2, or, Therefore the people quarreled with Moses and said, is the Lord with us or not? Ooh. Does that feel a little different? They're not just complaining about Moses here. And Moses, I'm sure, says something similar probably. What are we? I didn't bring you out here of my own will. The Lord has told us to come out here. We've got to trust him. But the people were actually saying, and remember what they had just seen. All the wonders in Egypt, the crossing of the Red Sea. And they're saying, is the Lord with us or not?
And they were still seeing. There was still a cloud leading them by day that could be seen as a pillar of fire by night. So they could still see God right, full of his presence right there.
And even though they were thirsty and hungry, they were still, that's an incredible sign. Brother Al? It reminds me of my favorite verse, Romans 8:18. For I consider that the sufferings of this present world are not worthy to be compared with the glory to be revealed in us. That's it. He's going to take us to a place where everything we could possibly need is going to be there in abundance. And that's aside from the fact that the Lord will be there, which is all we need. Luke? And, as God sometimes does, he makes the problem big enough. You know, you think about Gideon's 300 men. He makes the equation make so little sense, no sense actually, so that when he accomplishes it, there's no reason to think it came from anywhere else. Miraculous provisions. Tristan. We're about to read some of that. All right, so look at Deuteronomy 6:16. Deuteronomy 6:16 says, "You shall not put the Lord your God to the test as you tested him at Massa." All right, what should that remind us of? You shall not put the Lord your God to the test. What other story does that remind you of? All right, it was Jesus, right? When being tempted by Satan. It is written, you shall not tempt the Lord your God. The rest of the verse that he references is like at Massa. This story that we're talking about. You want to talk about testing the Lord? Look at Satan and Jesus, okay? But right here is what we're talking about. This is testing the Lord, and it says just as much. Matthew 4 and Luke 4 are that story. All right, Deuteronomy 9:22. Says, again, at Taberah and at Massa and at Kibroth Hattaavah, you provoked the Lord to wrath. That's what Tristan just mentioned. This provoked the Lord to wrath. That's something we don't want to be in for sure. But it's that kind of level. It's that seriousness that God was upset. Is the Lord here or not? Can you imagine how that made the Lord feel? Psalm 78. Luke, you got something? All right, so Moses asked the Lord, what am I going to do? They're about to stone me. And the Lord says what? Take what? Your staff and go to the rock, and the rock at Horeb. And he struck the rock, and water came out of it, and the people drank. Again, the volume of water we're talking about is hard to believe coming from a rock. All right, Psalm 78, 18, 25 kind of sums up this whole section in a way. Psalm 78, 18 through 25. And in their heart they put God to the test by asking food according to their desire. Then they spoke against God. They said, can God prepare a table in the wilderness? Again, the arrogance and pride after what they'd already seen. Can God prepare a table in the wilderness? Watch this. And he provided meat and bread. He certainly can. Behold, he struck the rock, so the waters gushed out, and streams were overflowing. Can he give bread also? Will he provide meat for his people? Therefore the Lord heard and was full of wrath, and a fire was kindled against Jacob, and anger also mounted against Israel, because they did not believe in God and did not trust in his salvation. Yet he commanded the clouds above and opened the doors of heaven. He rained down manna upon them to eat and gave them food from heaven. Man did eat the bread of angels. He sent them food in abundance. Do we believe in God, and do we trust in his salvation? I think those are reasonable questions that we can get out of this. Yes, sir. That's right. And if we learn our lessons, we can get hope from that. All right. So on to Amalek. Does anybody know who Amalek was? Like the original Amalek guy? He was Esau's grandson. All right. So this is the lineage of Amalek here. They're still at Rephidim, and Amalek comes to them. What was the state of Israel and nature of Amalek's attack? Did anybody see that? Yeah, that's right. Deuteronomy 25 says, for sake of time, I'll tell you, you can look at it yourself, but it says that Israel was weak. Oh, 25. I'm in the wrong chapter. I'm so confused. Yeah, so hungry and thirsty. Remember, hungry and thirsty to like a real level that I've probably never experienced. And somebody comes and attacks them. Okay, how did that attack come about? Read, I think it's the next verse. All right, they came from the rear, picking off the weakest of Israel. Come on now. They were, that's right, yeah, exactly. So God did not like that at all. And we'll see that at the end of this chapter. All right, so Moses tells Joshua, you go get some guys and we're going to fight in a battle. When are they going to fight the battle? Or at least when does Moses go up the hill? Tomorrow, okay? All right, so the next day. So what was Moses taking with him? All right, the rod of God, the staff of God. All right, what about this staff? We've talked a lot about this staff. I don't know that I've emphasized it maybe like it should be, but when we talk about this staff, this is the staff that Moses had originally when he met God. He threw it down, turned into a serpent. He told him that this is the staff you'll do the signs with. When he goes for Egypt, it says he takes the staff of God with him as he travels back to Egypt. He turns the Nile to blood. Remember, he was in front of Pharaoh and struck the Nile River, and it turned to blood. It's that staff. It brought on the hail. It brought on the locust. It split the Red Sea. It returned the Red Sea back to normal. And then earlier here, it brought water from the rock at Meribah. That's a pretty cool staff. Or is it a pretty cool God? It's a pretty cool God, right? God used this instrument, this property of Moses, I assume, to do these great signs. And God intentionally tells him many times, take the staff with you. And I imagine that people would have noticed that. All right, so what action affected how the battle was trending? All right, if Moses had his hand up, it says hand. I've always pictured two hands. And Moses and Aaron, Aaron and Hur definitely raised both hands, it seemed. But it says, let his hand down. I just noticed that this time for the first time. I don't know if y'all. That's right. Yeah, but is that my hands are heavy? I don't know.
Yeah,
I have no.
alternate.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I've pictured the staff, right? I think we've all seen those pictures. And maybe that's right. I have no idea. But it does say hand to start out with. So when the hand is in the air, Israel's prevailing over Amalek. If they put it down, all right, Amalek's coming in, okay? And it says Moses' hands were heavy. All right, he's trying, but his hands are coming down some before they help him out. And Amalek prevails. God's hand, obviously, is in this. So his hands get so heavy, they devise a plan to kind of help out. What's the plan? All right, they got him a rock to sit on, and Aaron and Hur were there to hold his hands up, and so Israel prevailed that day. All right, 14 through 16, verses 14 through 16. What did God decree concerning Amalek? All right, and he also tells him, hey, write this in a book and tell Joshua, because Joshua's going to carry this forward. We see Amalek again in Deuteronomy 25, 17 through 19. It's a reminder kind of from Moses. They're going to be defeated. 1 Samuel 15 is when Saul did not destroy the Amalekites utterly like God had instructed. The kingdom was ripped away from him. 1 Samuel 30, David defeats them pretty drastically. And then we have The Lord is my banner is the place that the altar that Moses named, and that's Yahweh Nasi, just one of God's names or attributes that's assigned to him in Scripture. He is my signpost, my banner that goes before me wherever I go. That's kind of the idea. All right, thank you for your attention.
read a verse from Psalm 27 here in just a moment. The repeated refrains throughout the Psalms is, wait on the Lord. Easy to say, hard to do. I was just kind of thinking back through the study we've been doing in the three-cycle approach on some instances where we see people when they should have waited on God, but they didn't wait on God, and it usually brought about circumstances that were troublesome or challenging or consequential to them. I think about Abram and Sarah whenever they're waiting for the promise of God, who said he was going to make of Abram this great nation and give him this son by implication. And he's waited for a while and no son. And so Sarai has this great idea to get her handmaiden from Egypt to bear a son in her stead. And the consequences of Ishmael coming into the family, the distress that placed with Hagar becoming pregnant, and the back and forth where Ishmael is, when Isaac finally does come along, the provoking and the teasing that takes place. Eventually, they both have to be driven away, when in actuality things would have been much better off if they would have just waited on God. I think about Jacob and his mother Rebekah. Whenever the Lord came to Rebekah and said, you've got twins, the older is going to serve the younger. And she seemingly held on to that all this time, and when it appears that Isaac is going to give the blessing to Esau the older, she says, hey, I've hatched a plan in order to secure the blessing for you. A plan that deceives Isaac and gives Jacob the blessing, but that results with him having to leave because Esau's ready to kill him, and he never gets to see his mother alive again. And so, yes, wait on the Lord is easy to say, but sometimes that can be very hard to do. But yet that's what we're told in Psalm 27, verse 14, where the psalmist says, wait for the Lord. Be strong, and let your heart take courage. Wait for the Lord. Why is it that waiting on God is so hard at times? And maybe that's where you're at this evening in some situation in your life, some hardship that you're dealing with, some temptation, some suffering, some persecution, some challenging trial that you're facing, and it's testing your faith. And you're tired of waiting. Maybe you've waited in prayer, but you begin to start to do things in order to bring about a resolution. I think that's one of the reasons that waiting is so hard, is because when we feel like we're not doing anything, that no resolution's being done and nothing's being done, and so I've got to act in order to bring about a solution to whatever difficulty it is I'm dealing with. Yet time and time and time again, we are told that we need to wait on God. And it takes, as the psalmist says here, it takes strength. And it takes courage to say, I've tried to solve this problem on my own, and it's been to no avail. And so I'm just going to tap the brakes, and I'm going to give this over to the Lord. Now, don't get me wrong, I know that there are times to act, but there's also times to wait, and it takes wisdom and discernment to distinguish between when should I wait and when should I go, when should I act. Kind of like we saw in the Red Sea crossing the other night, where Moses tells the people, stand still and see the salvation of God, and then God says, no, tell the people to go forward. Okay, so there's a time to wait, there's a time to move in faith. We have to be wise and discerning in that. But when it's clear that what we should be doing is waiting, to move forward anyway or attempt to move forward oftentimes produces results like we see with Abraham and Sarai or Isaac and Jacob, things that are disastrous and give more trouble to us than they should. A faith that waits when it should stand still displeases God, and a faith that acts when it should wait also displeases God. And I think oftentimes the Lord in His mercy lingers in bringing a solution into our life. Maybe because, as we read about and studied about in our Bible class tonight, God wants to test us. Does He have our heart? When it seems like no answer's coming and no resolution's being provided, will we still trust Him then? Will we wait with faith and patience? And then to bring in the deliverance that He always will. So consider your life tonight. Are you dealing with a circumstance? And here's one of the ways that I've discovered it's probably a good idea that what you need to be doing is waiting on God rather than acting. If it feels like in trying to solve this issue, whatever it may be, that you're just beating your head against the wall and getting nowhere, probably a good indication that what you need to be doing is waiting on God. But you know, there are times to act as well. And if you're here tonight and you're not right with the Lord, this is not one of those situations in which you want to wait. Now is a time for action. If there's sin in your life that you need to deal with or you need help dealing with, now is a time to act. If you've never rendered obedience to the gospel, submitted your life to Christ, now is the time to act. If there's things going on in your life and you've been acting and it's not getting any better, or maybe it's getting worse, perhaps now might be a time to wait. Wait on the Lord. Be strong. Take courage. If anyone needs to respond to the invitation, would you come forward as we stand and sing?